Kazuki Sato stared at the crumpled note in his hand. The hastily scribbled words promising the revelation of dark secrets hidden in a remote mountain village. He had learned not to ignore such whispers as a seasoned investigative journalist. They serve as the entrances to the tales that waited to be revealed behind closed doors. A place that seemed to have stood still in time was the village of Yomiyama, nestled between the jagged peaks of the Japanese Alps. The scene changed from the bustling city to a forgotten world shrouded in mist and ancient forest as Kazuki's train chugged along the curvy tracks. Kazuki noticed the weight of the villagers' eyes as soon as he got off the train. When he approached them, their eyes flitted away, leaving a tense silence in their wake. The smell of damp earth permeated the atmosphere, giving the impression that the village was being gradually engulfed by the surrounding wilderness. As Kazuki walked further into the village, he encountered dirt paths instead of cobblestone streets. The homes, which were constructed of dark wood and had roofs covered in moss, appeared to huddle together as if looking for shelter from the approaching night. Kazuki noticed that the villagers he met displayed guarded curiosity, and he experienced an intangible wall separating him from the people he was trying to understand. Kazuki made the decision to stop by the neighborhood pub as the sun set. He was drawn in by the murmur of conversation and the lantern's flickering light like a beacon in the night. Although the interior's dim lighting provided a welcome escape from the chilly outside air, it did little to ease the unease that clung to him like a second skin. The bartender, an older man with a scruffy beard, nodded to Kazuki as he walked up to the counter. Kazuki leaned in and placed his drink order while lowering his voice to a sinister whisper. He said, looking for any sign of recognition on the bartender's face as he added, "I'm looking for information about a certain group that lives in this village." The man leaned in and his eyes narrowed. "Stranger, you should exercise caution when asking questions," he cautioned, his voice barely audible above the sound of the wind outside. "There are things here that should be kept a secret." At the bartender's words, Kazuki couldn't help but experience a chill down his spine. He knew that he was on the cusp of uncovering something dangerous, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. He was not unfamiliar with the dark underbelly of the world, and he was determined to expose its ugliness. "I know the risks," Kazuki replied softly, his resolve unflappable. "But despite how terrifying the truth may be, I cannot run from it." For a brief moment, the bartender scrutinized him, looking for any indication of uncertainty or fear. He finally nodded and motioned for Kazuki to follow him into a back room that was not visible. The bartender started talking softly as the door shut behind them, telling tales of a mysterious cult and its enigmatic leader. The darkness seemed to close in on Kazuki as he listened, and he could feel the chilling fear seeping into his chest. But he was aware that he was too late to go back. He had caught a glimpse of the evil that the village was hiding, and he was determined to make it public at all costs. Every day that went by, Kazuki could feel the thick cloud of secrecy enveloping the Yomiyama village. He walked through the winding lanes and tiny passageways looking for bits of information concealed in the shadows. Although the villagers were silent, a flash of fear could be seen in their eyes when he mentioned the enigmatic cult. One morning, Kazuki found himself in front of a crumbling shrine as the sun's rays barely broke through the thick fog that surrounded the village. The wooden structure was covered in vines, and the old stone steps were covered in moss. The only sound in the eerie silence was the wind's rustling of the leaves. A sudden movement caught Kazuki's attention, and when he turned around, he saw an elderly woman lighting incense at the base of the shrine with her back bowed from age. Kazuki couldn't help but wonder what secrets she held within her weathered heart as she prayed quietly while her hands trembled. She gave him a roomy look as he cautiously drew closer to her. "Do you seek guidance, young man?" she asked, her voice trembling like the flame of the incense. With his voice barely audible above the wind, which seemed to get louder with each word, Kazuki replied, "I'm looking for information about a group that lives in this village." The elderly woman's eyes widened as she nervously looked around. She spoke barely above a whisper, "You must tread carefully, for the shadows here are deep and treacherous. But I'll tell you what I know if you're determined to learn the truth." She motioned for Kazuki to come with her to her modest home, a tiny hut tucked away at the edge of the forest. Herbs filled the air inside, and the walls, which were adorned with charms and talismans, were illuminated by the soft glow of candles. The elderly woman started telling her tale as she started a pot of tea. She described a charismatic figure by the name of Hikaru Yamamoto, who had long since migrated to the community and offered salvation to those who felt abandoned and lost. His message had resonated with many, and the cult that had been hiding in the village's shadows had grown in strength and influence. The elderly woman described the cult's dark past, revealing that its roots had been entwined with local legends and myths for many years. Hikaru claimed to have found an ancient power that could bestow incredible power on those deserving. Kazuki listened intently, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end as the old woman's words painted a chilling picture of the cult's activities. He was aware that he was about to make a terrifying discovery, but he was powerless to back away at this point. The elderly woman handed Kazuki an old, torn map as the fire in the hearth flickered and died. She muttered, her eyes a mixture of fear and sorrow. "This will lead you to their sanctuary. But take care, the way is treacherous, and the shadows hide things that can devastate the mind." With the map firmly grasped in his hands, Kazuki experienced a sense of renewed purpose. He was aware that the answers he was looking for were waiting to be discovered deep within the village. He prepared himself for the impending darkness, but he was also aware of the danger that lay ahead of him. Kazuki followed the map through the forest at night, his heart thumping as the shadows whispered all around him. The route wound and turned, taking him farther into the night, until all that remained of the village was a distant glow. As Kazuki came closer to the cult's secret sanctuary, the moon, a thin crescent in the sky, cast unsettling shadows on the ground. The compound was a cluster of ancient buildings, their wooden walls blackened by time, and a tall fence encircled the perimeter, warding off unwanted intruders. Kazuki scaled the fence while holding his breath and fell silently to the ground on the other side. He was aware that the cult's members were awake and getting ready for some sinister ritual because he could hear a faint murmur of voices inside the compound. Kazuki crouched in the shadows and edged closer to the main structure, where candles flickered in the windows. He peered inside the wooden door, which was slightly ajar, and saw a group of people wearing dark robes with their faces concealed by hoods. As Kazuki made his way through the dimly lit corridors, his heart was thumping in his ears. The room's walls were covered in old scrolls and books with cryptic diagrams and symbols that appeared to dance before his eyes. Kazuki found a room in the sanctuary's depths that made his blood chill. Grotesque paintings that showed scenes of ritual sacrifice and deformed, monstrous beings were hung on the walls. A stone altar in the middle of the space was covered in dark, dry blood, a chilling reminder of the cult's heinous customs. A small door that was barely discernible beneath the macabre artwork was hidden in the shadows as Kazuki's eyes grew accustomed to the darkness. He cautiously opened it and made his way down the steep staircase that led deep inside the compound. With each step, the air got chillier and the stench of decay got stronger. Kazuki could feel the icy grip of fear tightening around his chest. Kazuki entered a room filled with flickering torches at the bottom of the staircase. The shelves that lined the walls had their contents hidden by the twirling shadows. As he got closer, Kazuki began to feel increasingly horrified as he saw that the shelves were stocked with jars that contained preserved animal remains and deformed fetuses, the twisted limbs of which were evidence of the cult's bizarre experiments. Kazuki's heart began to race when a loud noise suddenly came from the hallway outside. The sound of approaching footsteps caused him to quickly hide behind a tall cabinet, his breathing becoming ragged and shallow. Hikaru Yamamoto, the cult's leader, entered the chamber after the door squeaked open. His expression, a mask of calm and icy calculation, made Kazuki shudder. Hikaru took a jar off a shelf, its contents wriggling in the dim light. His voice was barely audible above the crackling of the torches as he mumbled an incantation. Kazuki was aware that what he had discovered was much more sinister and dangerous than he had ever imagined as he left the chamber. Kazuki realized he had to stop the cult's activities and reveal the darkness that threatened to engulf the village as he felt a growing sense of dread. He first needed to assemble a team of allies to aid him in the struggle against the turbo power that Hikaru wished to unleash upon the world. Since his terrifying experience in the cult's compound, Kazuki had hardly slept at all. He tossed and turned in the dark as visions of the depraved experiments and the blood-stained altar tormented his sleep. He was aware that he needed the assistance of those who had escaped the cult in order to expose the truth, because he knew he couldn't defeat the group on his own. He scoured the village and its surroundings for days, following rumors and whispers that directed him to the residences of the betrayed and the disillusioned. They were the people who had once listened to Hikaru Yamamoto, mesmerized by his promises and words, only to have their faith in him shattered by the darkness they had come to understand in his teachings. These former cult members were presented to Kazuki one by one, their faces etched with sorrow and regret. They told him their stories, detailing the mistreatment they had experienced and the atrocities they had seen. Akemi, a young woman, told Kazuki about the rituals in which the cult would conjure twisted beings from the Earth's core by channeling their own members' life energy. Akemi had been made to take part in these rituals. She showed him the physical scars that were a permanent reminder of the suffering she had gone through. Toshiro, an older man, described how Hikaru had used his loneliness and grief to entice him into the cult, and how he had been indoctrinated. He had lost everything: his friends, his family, and his dignity, and was now burdened by the crushing weight of his past deeds. Kazuki could see the fear and shame that still lingered in their eyes as they related their stories. While they were plagued by their past, they also had a sliver of hope that they might be able to stop Hikaru's reign of terror. Kazuki was aware that these survivors were the only ones who could bring down the cult and reveal its sinister secrets. He also understood that in order to bring justice to those who had perished under the cult's pernicious influence, they would have to face their fears and the horrors of their past. The group of ex-cultists gathered in the dimly lit room of a deserted inn and listened intently as Kazuki explained his strategy. He would need their assistance to break into the compound once more and collect proof of the cult's crimes. They would defeat Hikaru Yamamoto's perverted vision by working together to dispel the darkness that had engulfed their lives. As the group decided to assist Kazuki in his mission, the atmosphere in the room was tense and full of anticipation. They were aware of the dangers and the fact that they were up against an adversary who had previously had total dominance over their bodies and minds. But they also understood that they couldn't watch helplessly as the cult expanded its evil influence. In the midst of the darkness, Kazuki sensed a glimmer of hope as they prepared to face the cult. He was aware of the dangers that lay ahead, but he also believed that by working as a team, they would be able to defeat the evil that dwelled in the village's shadows. The night of their intrusion came, shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to hint at undiscovered dangers and hidden secrets. As Kazuki gave them one last piece of advice, the group had gathered at the edge of the forest in the pitch black, their faces a mixture of resolve and fear. As they once more approached the cult's compound, they moved through the shadows, motionless as ghosts, their hearts thumping in their chests. Each of them was familiar with the layout and had vivid memories of their time spent inside the building. The group dispersed as they approached the compound, each member having a distinct task to complete. Toshiro, Akemi, and Kazuki traveled to the main building in an effort to find proof of the cult's evil deeds. The others dispersed to create a distraction with the intention of luring the cultists away from the structure and buying their allies some crucial time. When Kazuki and his team snuck inside the main building, it was eerily quiet, the candles' flickering glow casting foreboding shadows on the walls. They moved slowly and quietly as they made their way through the dim hallways. They were taken to a secret room by Akemi, a location she had been shown while a member of the cult. They were able to pry open the locked door with Toshiro's assistance, which revealed a room containing old books and scrolls. As they entered, the air was heavy with dust and the smell of decay, and Kazuki experienced a chill down his spine. They perused the pages of the forbidden texts as they searched the room with trembling fingers. There, in the fading ink and obscure symbols, they discovered the damning proof they required. In-depth descriptions of the cult's rituals, the calling forth of evil spirits, and the manipulation of ages-old forces that threatened to rip apart reality. A sudden commotion reverberated throughout the building as they were gathering the documents. As the sounds of chaos and panic grew louder, Kazuki realized that they were running out of time. As they turned to leave, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside the chamber. They had to get out before they were discovered. A loud roar filled the air as the room started to tremble and the walls started to vibrate with an evil force. The group scrambled to find a way out as the candles flickered and died, leaving the chamber in complete darkness. As the darkness closed in around them, fear gripped their hearts and threatened to engulf them. When Kazuki reached that low point, his resolve grew stronger. He was aware that he had to find a way out and make the horrors they had discovered public in order to avoid letting the cult win. He found a secret passage that took them out of the chamber and into the night with a surge of determination. They saw their companions waiting for them as they left the compound, their faces a mixture of relief and fear. Their hearts were racing from adrenaline. Their footsteps reverberated through the night as they hurried towards the village as they fled the cult sanctuary together. Despite making it out alive, Kazuki understood that the conflict was far from over. It would require all of their strength and bravery to face Hikaru Yamamoto and reveal the evil that had crept into Yomiyama's very heart. The cult still had control over the community. The group braced themselves for the impending final confrontation as they stood on the edge of the forest with the fog engulfing them like a spectral embrace. They were a group of broken souls united by a common goal. And while they were aware that they were up against an unfathomable evil, they also knew that they had each other. The following days were a blur of planning and preparation. If they wanted to dismantle the cult and save their village, Kazuki and his newly discovered allies knew they had to act quickly and decisively. In order to piece together the complex web of rituals and evil forces that served as the basis for Hikaru Yamamoto's twisted vision, they studied the evidence they had gathered. The group formed bonds that were tempered by their shared experiences and the horrors they had seen as they prepared for their final confrontation. The cult had broken each of them, but when they came together, they found strength in their solidarity and a sense of direction that had been missing from their lives for a very long time. It was a new moon night on the night they had decided to confront Hikaru, and the sky was a vast expanse of inky blackness that appeared to swallow the stars. As the group made their way to the meeting house, where Hikaru and his supporters were known to congregate, the village was still and silent, with their faces etched with resolve and righteous rage. Kazuki and his allies stormed into the meeting house armed with the evidence they had found and the conviction that they were fighting for Yomiyama's very soul. Surprisingly, the cult members were powerless to stop Kazuki and his team from exposing the heinous truth of their actions. The evidence of Hikaru's treachery and the atrocities he had committed in the name of power caused the villagers, who had been so blind to the darkness that had crept into their midst, to recoil in horror. Hikaru attempted to rally his supporters, refute the accusations, and tip the balance in his favor while wearing a mask of icy rage on his face. But his words were hollow, and his once loyal supporters abandoned him because they couldn't reconcile the man they had admired with the monster he had turned out to be. Kazuki approached Hikaru as he stood by himself, his hold on power eroding all around him, and demanded an explanation for his crimes and the lives he had taken. Hikaru spat a poisonous curse at Kazuki, his eyes burning with rage and desperation, threatening to bring ruin upon him and everyone else who had dared to challenge him. As the air erupted with dark energy at that precise moment, Kazuki realized Hikaru was more dangerous than ever. He was aware that Hikaru would go to any lengths, including rupturing reality itself, to see that they were all destroyed. Hikaru summoned the dark abilities he had spent years honing, unleashing a torrent of twisted, evil energy that threatened to consume them all with a roar that reverberated throughout the night. The meeting house's walls shook as if they were alive, and the ground shook beneath their feet. By relying on the strength of their ties and the strength of their unity, Kazuki and his allies retaliated against Hikaru's attack. The cacophony of screams and raw, primal energy from their struggle filled the air, shaking the village's very foundations. In the end, Hikaru's own arrogance turned out to be his downfall. He lost control as he attempted to fully control the dark energies at his disposal, and they turned on him with a vengeance. His screams resounded throughout the night, a symphony of agony and terror that announced his dramatic demise into oblivion. Kazuki and his allies were aware that their battle was far from over as the dust settled and the village started to put their broken lives back together. Despite the cult's defeat, the darkness it had assured and lingered. After their terrifying encounter with Hikaru Yamamoto, the Yomiyama village started a slow, painful process of healing. The cult's evil influence had been revealed, and the villagers were forced to face the darkness that had grown inside of them. Despite being hailed as heroes, Kazuki and his allies were all too aware that the battle was far from over. The dark energies that Hikaru had unleashed were still present, creating a palpable, eerie atmosphere that shrouded the village. They were aware that unless they found a way to rid Yomiyama of its stain, their memories of the horrors of the past would never truly leave them. They discovered a series of rituals that promised to rebalance the world and drive out the darkness that had taken root in their village as they dug deeper into the ancient texts they had found in the cult's secret chamber. They were aware that they had no choice but to attempt the rituals, which were challenging and necessitated a thorough knowledge of the arcane arts. Kazuki and his allies set out on a mission to rebuild their village and treat the wounds that had been inflicted upon their souls after gathering their courage and strength. They traveled to the center of the forest, to the exact location of the cult's sinister experiments, and there they started the laborious rituals of cleansing. As they tap into the strength of their unity and the knowledge of the ages to drive out the darkness that had consumed Yomiyama. The air was thick with the aroma of burning herbs and the chanting of ancient incantations. Kazuki and his allies maintained their resolve while a fierce wind tore through the trees and storm clouds swirled above them. Their voices rose in a chorus of defiance and hope. A brilliant flash of light filled the clearing as the ritual came to a close, and the purifying fire consumed the evil energies that had afflicted the village. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, the sun peeked through the storm clouds and cast a warm, golden light over the village. Kazuki and his allies were worn out and drained, but they knew they had won. They had confronted their deepest fears and the ghosts of their past, and as a result, they had come out of it stronger and more united than ever. They were welcomed back to the village with tears of joy and relief, as well as the knowledge that they had spared Yomiyama from an even worse fate. Although the scars left by their ordeal would never truly disappear, they had managed to come to terms with them and move on as a unit. They had defeated the darkness that had once threatened to consume them. But Kazuki understood that their story was far from over. There would always be shadows waiting to take root and spread their evil influence in remote corners of the globe. He was aware that the light would never truly go out as long as there were people prepared to stand up and fight. And as he stood beside his friends and allies, their faces etched with the memories of their shared ordeal, he knew that they would be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. United by their courage and their unwavering determination to protect their village and the ones they loved, Kazuki and his allies were aware that their world would never be the same again despite their valiant victory and the feeling of renewal that had swept over Yomiyama. The darkness they had banished had left its mark on the village, and the scars of their ordeal served as a constant reminder of the horrors they had faced. As things started to get back to normal, Kazuki started having nightmares about Hikaru Yamamoto and the dark legacy he had left behind. He was aware that the darkness they had vanquished was only a small part of a much larger tapestry that contained hidden dangers and long-forgotten secrets. Kazuki set out on a quest to learn everything he could about the arcane arts and the hidden world that existed just beyond the veil of reality, because he wanted to protect his village and the people he loved. He combed through the antiquated writings they had rescued from the cult's hidden chamber in search of the knowledge of those who had battled the evil for ages. As Kazuki's knowledge increased, he also became more conscious of the invisible forces at work in the world. In the pitch black, he started to pick up the voices of beings that had long been watching humanity from a distance. Despite their evasiveness and secrecy, Kazuki was aware that they were the only ones who could explain the true nature of the darkness and the power it possessed. Life in the village, meanwhile, was anything but tranquil. Strange occurrences and sightings that defied explanation started to become the subject of rumors. In addition to the discovery of mutilated livestock and strange symbols carved into the trees, several villagers also saw ghostly figures lurking at the forest's edge. Kazuki understood that these were more than just folk beliefs or the imaginations of a traumatized population. The darkness was trying by any means possible to regain its hold on the world, despite the fact that it had been weakened but not entirely vanquished. Kazuki and his allies were forced to face the chilling reality that the battle they had fought was only the first shot in a war that would last for generations as the occurrences became more frequent and disturbing. The world was in danger of being consumed by a force that was much larger and more pernicious than the darkness they had faced. To stand against the darkness and defend the world from the horrors that lay just beyond the edge of reality, they had been chosen, not by chance, but by destiny. Even though they had survived unspeakable horrors, they knew that their struggles were far from over. When the darkness returned, Kazuki and his allies would be there to confront it, equipped with the skills and strength they had developed through their battles. They had never imagined the world to be as dangerous and uncertain as it was, but they were no longer the lost and broken souls they had once been. Kazuki and his allies faced the unknown with hope and a fierce, unyielding spirit, united by their courage and desire to defend those they loved. No matter what horrors awaited them in the shadows, they would face the darkness again and prevail because they had done so once before. Because of them, the sun would never truly set on the village of Yomiyama because they were the light that dispelled the darkness. For Kazuki and his allies, the months that followed were a period of both development and anxiety. They discovered a vast and terrifying world that existed just beyond the limits of their comprehension as they developed their abilities and dove deeper into the secrets of the arcane. The voices of ancient beings that wished to direct and control them in their pursuit of knowledge were heard louder and louder with each passing day in the shadows. Kazuki was aware of the peril they faced, but he also understood that they had no choice but to press on in order to protect their village and the surrounding area from the approaching darkness. Kazuki and his allies found themselves drawn to an ancient ruin tucked away deep within the forest as the seasons changed and the world around them withered and died. They had arrived at a location of unimaginable power and terror that had lain hidden for centuries thanks to whispers in the night. They found a number of inscriptions that spoke of a prophecy, a time of darkness and conflict when the world would be on the verge of destruction. As they explored the crumbling halls and chambers of the ruin, the inscriptions described a band of heroes who had been handpicked by fate to battle evil and defend the world from the horrors that would try to annihilate it. Kazuki and his allies were aware that they were the prophesied heroes and that they had been called upon to deal with an unprecedented threat. Additionally, they were aware that they were not the only ones who had been chosen by fate to stand against the evil and defend the world from the approaching storm. Kazuki and his allies took a solemn oath as they stood in the center of the ancient ruin, surrounded by the remains of a long-gone era. They vowed that they would go to any lengths, even if it meant plunging deeper into the night and confronting the indescribable horrors that awaited them to defend their village and the world beyond it. At their words, the world appeared to tremble, and the whispers in the darkness became louder still, their voices filled with a mix of awe and hunger. Because they understood, just like Kazuki and his allies did, that the battle they had just finished was only a prelude to a bigger conflict that would decide the fate of the entire world and everyone who lived in it. Kazuki and his allies felt the weight of the world on their shoulders as they left the ancient ruin and made their way back to their village. They were aware that chaos and despair were quickly engulfing the world, that darkness was closing in, and that they would be required to face these things while also serving as a beacon of hope and light. Although they were terrified, they were also unwavering in their resolve, their hearts burning with a spirit of fortitude and the knowledge that they were not fighting alone. With the strength of their unity and the knowledge of the ages, they would face whatever horrors lay ahead because they had each other, because they were the ones who had been chosen. The world's future was in their hands. They would be prepared to face the storm at any cost when it materialized because they knew it was coming.